I'm Professor Tina Good, and this video is on anti-racism and literary analysis. One of the things that literary analysts have to consider is what to do with racist texts, or texts that use racist language, or for that matter, texts that use language that denigrates or marginalizes any group of people. Do we ban them, such as To Kill a Mockingbird or Huckleberry Finn, both of which were on banned book lists because of racist language that was used, even though those two particular novels actually seek to challenge racist ideals? Do we ignore them? No. What we have learned is that silencing or burying conversations that are uncomfortable does not make the problems go away. It just pushes them underground so that they erupt at unpredictable moments, sometimes violently. And in silencing them, we're also perpetuating policies and practices and even language that maintain and promote inequity among society. So what do we do then? Well, let me share my screen and so that I can show you a PowerPoint that I've developed to deal with this situation, at least in our class, and also where I will be discussing policies that will need to be used and applied in your writing when dealing with racist language in some of the texts that we may be reading this semester. So Ibram Kendi wrote a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And in that book, he says the opposite of racist is not a racist, it's actually an anti-racist. Now, what does he mean by that? So he says that to be, not a racist is actually, sort of a passive way of being. It's just a state of being. There's no action to it, right? So it's just, I'm not a racist, therefore I'm not responsible for any racism that exists. It assumes, therefore, that there can be a neutral position, right? And of course, it is a position that is without criteria. That is to say that, what if I held you to standards, right, when I was grading your essays, and I didn't tell you what those standards were, right? You would be quite upset over that. So what does it mean to be not a racist? What are the standards for that you could actually claim such a thing? And they just simply don't exist. The other thing, of course, is that, the racist versus not a racist is incredibly divisive, right? I mean, if you were to accuse someone of being a racist, right, it just shuts down the conversation, and then all they have to say is that I'm not a racist, and then nothing has been solved, and instead maybe you've just created more hostility. And finally, what he considers, to be even more important is that it focuses on, the individual. I am not a racist, rather than the public policies, practices, and behaviors that exist in our society that promote inequity of opportunities for marginalized groups, right? So that they can pursue the same kinds of happiness and opportunities that privileged groups get to enjoy. So what does he mean by being an anti-racist? Well, what he means by that is that, anti is against racism, right? Not, I'm not a racist, but I am against racism. So it is intentional, and you are actively, it's not a state of being, but you are actively seeking, right, to oppose racism. And in so doing, you need to know your own privilege, right? And he talks a lot about, listen, he knows that all groups, even dominant groups, right, have suffered economically, but he points out, like, but what if you've suffered simply, because of the color of your eyes? You didn't have a choice. You didn't get certain jobs just because of the color of your eyes, right? So he's saying, what if that were happening just because of the color of your skin? That no matter what you did, you were denied certain opportunities, right? Because of the color of your skin. And that being said, that you got certain opportunities simply because of the color of your skin. So think about that, and he says, like, know your privilege so that you can become sensitive to those areas that you have opportunity where others may not, simply based on things that they have no control over. Understand that racism in America is complex, right? To simplify it, to be not a racist or a racist is simply not an anti-racist solution, right? It's complex. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of animosity to it. There's a lot of traditions and practices that are not intentionally racist, but somehow create opportunities of inequity. So think about that. And then he says, to be an anti-racist is to expose and challenge policies, practices, and behaviors, right? And maybe as an individual, or maybe through organized efforts, right? That so that there's inequity not only amongst people of different races, but are also in groups that are marginalized within society based on other things like sexuality or gender or able-bodiedness, things like that. So anti-racism in literature then, right? So when we are analyzing literature, even when we come across racist language or racist text, right, we don't have to just ignore it, but we take an anti-racism framework when analyzing it, right? We said, silencing racism does not make it go away, but also sensitivity is not enough, right? Oh, I don't want to say that because it might offend someone. It's not enough, right? But studying it through an anti-racist framework can create opportunities of dialogue among diverse backgrounds, right? Which is what art and literature is intended to do, right? So that we develop an awareness of experiences that people that have had that are different from what we've had. So perhaps, in my mind, that, more importantly, we can increase our capacity for empathy for people who have experiences that are like or not like our own, right? And for him, studying literature through using an anti-racist framework can help us expose and challenge policies, practices, and behaviors that perpetuate inequity, because they will be reflected and or challenged in the literature that we read. One thing that we need to be aware of, right, as literary analysts and just as people who use language, language matters. What we say matters. How we say it matters. But also know that language is imperfect. That language can fail us. The thing that comes to mind most quickly is that when it comes to gender, right? There was a time, and I think if you speak any of the Latin languages, this, that if there was an unidentified person being spoken about, it was always referred to as he, right? And in the Latin languages, the group of people, whether they're men or men and women, it is the masculine pronoun that is used, right? And then what do we do then when, we have different genders that do not fall within the binary of he and she, right? Like English language does not provide us with the pronoun for that. And so we struggle with that, right? Silencing other groups. Same thing can happen in many different ways. So grammar can perpetuate this inequity, right? So we now use there when we're speaking for a singular who is transgender. So grammar is not perfect, and it can identify dominance within the society. What do we do about that? Well, what we've come to know is that dominant groups should not control naming of marginalized groups, right? We as the dominant group, if you're in a dominant group, does not get to decide what to call a non-dominant group. So how does that come down to us in this class for policy? There will be literature in this class that uses racist language. So how do we talk about racist language using an anti-racist framework? Well, first of all, just know that in this class, you can never use the N-word. Even if you are directly quoting a text, you may not use this word. So in a direct quote, the way that you would do it is how it is reflected here, right? Quotation marks, capital N, hyphen, word, quotation marks. That way we are not silencing, right, the use of racist language. We are challenging and exposing this policy, right? But we are not perpetuating it. So that is the way that I will expect you to use the word if directly quoting. Then there are other words that we've come across, right? The Langston Hughes poem uses colored. So when we see words that denigrate other races or marginalized groups, such as colored or Negro or other types of slurs, right? You may use those words when using them in a direct quote. But your interpretation must challenge the use of those words, right? Why are the use of those words problematic? If you are paraphrasing, then you should not use any racist language at all. And you should use the term that the group that represents them, that marginalized group, has chosen to use to identify themselves. In other words, the dominant group does not decide what the marginalized group should be named, right? So in this case, as of today, the NAACP says when we are referring to the group of what we call Black, of color, that we should use the word Black, that we should not use African American anymore. They choose to use the word Black. Okay, and if you're referring to any other type of group, then you'll need to do some research or contact me to find out how they should be referred to, right? We talked about this in Real Women Have Curves when we talked about the word Chicana, right? What that meant and how that's used. Okay, so we don't always know, and sometimes that is confusing, and it requires us to do some research, and it's ever changing, but that's okay. Doing that kind of research makes us more sensitive and aware to marginalized groups and the problems that they are facing. This is the last slide in the PowerPoint, which contains the policies for this class that I will be expecting you to use. It will also be attached to this video. I hope you have found this useful. If you have any questions about the policies when you're doing the writing of your essays, please feel free to email me. Thank you. Have a good day.